of all the legends that have graced the wild frontier. From Pecco Bill to John Henry, perhaps none have touched my heart as well as Paul Bunyan. Yes, as you all know, the Paul Bunyan videos have done very well on this channel. In fact, the first one is my second most popular video, and it's about to reach 1,000 views. So, yes, thank you. But, anyways, it's not actually quite at 1,000. It's like at 992, but that's close enough. I'm not going to be particular about it. But I thought I'd just go ahead and tell you all a third Paul Bunyan story. And I'm only going to go to 4 on this. I don't want to milk it too much. I feel like I might already be milking it just a little bit. But, you know, you all are enjoying them so much, and I'm having a lot of fun telling them, so I couldn't see the harm. But anyways, it is time to return to North Country once again, to that little town of Timbertown, where Paul Bunyan resides. Now, I've talked to you all a lot about some of Paul Bunyan's friends, from Johnny Inkslinger to Sourdough Sam. But I've never really touched on his other lumberjacks. Now, there was about 12 of them, and there was really more, but there were 12 main ones. And these lumberjacks were about as faithful to Sam as a lot of people are to religion. And, anyways, they were all, oddly enough, they all shared the same name, Elmer. And whenever Paul Bunyan wanted to call for them, he'd just call out, "Elmer!" And instead of having to call each and every name, he just screamed Elmer, and they'd all come running. And the lumberjacks, yes, they very much loved Paul Bunyan. In fact, one time, they decided to get a gift for him. They went out into the forest, and they found the tallest redwood tree they could find. And they chopped it down, and they began to fashion a pipe out of it. And it was a lot of hard work, a lot of woodwork. It took them many days, actually probably quite a few months. But when they were finally complete, they started to discuss how they were going to get it to Paul. And they finally decided on a train. They just put it down on the train and fastened it down, and they rode it right over. And when Paul Bunyan got his gift, he couldn't have been happier. He immediately stuck it into his mouth, and he began to blow out the smoke. And it was said that the smoke was so much that it covered all of the North Country, and all the people were coughing, but at least Paul enjoyed himself. Can't say everyone else did. But also, it should be mentioned that Paul would help them a lot, too. One time, it was the hard winter. In fact, that was what it was known as, the hard winter. I don't know exactly what year that's lost to the records. But anyways, it was so cold that all of the lumberjacks afraid that they might die. But eventually, Paul hatched upon an idea. He told them to grow their beards so that it fell down to their toes. And anyways, after that was done, they cut the beards and made little stockings for themselves out of the hair. And Paul Bunyan himself did this. He grew his beard nice and long. And when he cut his beard, it was so much that it could fill up all of the barns with, like, hay, only hair, of course. And the cows were sleeping in it. And they even had some more for later. But, anyways, yes, Paul Bunyan and his lumberjacks were some of the hardiest workers ever known. And another one of his friends, Babe the Blue Ox, I've talked about before. But did you know Babe the Blue Ox had a friend as well? Her name was Bessie, the yellow cow. And Babe was kind of winter, and Bessie was summer. Bessie loved the sunshine, running out in the green, and she was a fast cow. You know, if you were to light a match, she'd be there before you'd even put it on the wick. But anyways, Bessie didn't like the winter, as much as Babe at least. And whenever it got cold, she would refuse to eat, and she'd get all very thin and like a skeleton. And this was especially bad luck, because that happened to be the year of the hard winter. So Paul was trying to come up with some way to get Bessie to eat. And finally he hatched upon an idea. He got her some glasses that were tinted with green glass, so that all Bessie could see was green. And when she looked down at the snow, she just assumed that it was grass and started to eat it. And eventually she became healthy again, she got fat, and began to make a lot of milk. And they had plenty of milk for the year, plenty of milk for the cats, and plenty of butter to grease the roads with. But another thing that happened was Paul Bunyan was told that there was a race, and he knew how fast Bessie was, so he decided to go down to where the race was being held, New York City, and see if he could win. So anyways, Bessie and Paul went to the race, and as Paul was walking along, he kind of carried his axe so that it was like dragging on the ground, and it dragged so much that it ended up making the Grand Canyon. Well, eventually, Paul Bunyan reached the city. It's said to be New York. I'm not sure if that's the correct location, but whatever the case, he reached this city, and there was this man there, and he was a bald man. And he was saying that his ostrich was the fastest in the world, that it was the fastest of all the deserts, in all the desert, and all the places that he had visited. And Paul decided that he'd take him up on the challenge. So there was this big bet held, and everyone was giving up money. And everyone thought that maybe the ostrich would win because the ostrich was much smaller and much faster. But when the gun was fired, Bessie took off. And the ostrich was just standing there, and by the time Bessie reached the finish line, the ostrich had only taken one step. So Bessie was the clear winner of that one, and Paul made himself a good amount of money to help his lumberjack community. Anyways, there's another friend that I wanted to talk about, and this is one of those stories I feel like someone might be pulling someone's leg, and we try not to do that here on this show. We try to keep this pretty based in fact, but just for the fun of it and just for giggles, I'm going to go ahead and tell you it. So there was this other lumberjack that lived down even further north called Big Joe Mufferall. And Big Joe Mufferall kind of looked a lot like Paul Bunyan, had the same beard and everything. And one day he was chopping wood when he heard one of his lumberjacks calling and saying that there was a man here to see him named Paul Bunyan. Anyways, Big Joe Mufferall walked over, and when he came to Paul Bunyan, he sort of startled because he was looking at him. He was so big, and Paul Bunyan was so big, and Paul Bunyan sort of looked at him too because it was the first time two such creatures had saw each other in this world. And Paul Bunyan said, "So there it is, the man that's been copying me, right down to the buttons and the shirt and the hair." And Big Joe Mufferall said, "I know you, yes, and you're the one that's copying me. You've got my clothes and my buttons and my hair and everything." Well, anyways, Paul Bunyan, he said, "Well, them are fighting words. You better take 'em now or I'm gonna pound you one." And Big Joe Mufferall said, "Well, you just go ahead and pound me one, 'cause I ain't taking it back." And so these two giants get in a row. It was a humongous fight. The mountains were torn aside. It was like two gods fighting each other, if I may use the expression. But anyways, eventually, they were fighting when Big Joe Mufferall says, wait, we need to take a breath at least." Paul Bunyan said, "Well, all right." And they sat down and they began to smoke their pipe because that's what men back then did when they were finished fighting. But anyways, Paul Bunyan looked at him and he said, Now wait a minute. I just had a thought. So you say you have yourself a blue ox too?" And Big Joe Mufferall said, "Yeah." And he said, "And you have a sourdough Sam?" And Big Joe Mufferall said, "Yeah." And Paul Bunyan was thinking about this and he said, "Why, I think I've solved this mystery. Why, it's not that you and me are different people. It's that I'm me, and I'm you, and you're me." And Big Joe Mufferall said, "You mean we're like sort of reflections of each other?" "Exactly," said Paul Bunyan. And they both had a big chuckle out of this, realizing that they'd been fighting themselves the whole time. And again, I don't know if that story's true, but I took a little bit of joy out of it. Well, anyways, that's really all I can tell you about many of Paul Bunyan's friends. Of course, there is one more, Paul Bunyan's wife. We haven't really heard much about her. But the truth is that I don't really have many records of her existence. There is one about her going and she found she was looking for this gold locket in the dirt, and Paul Bunyan came over and decided to help her and began digging, and eventually they found it and got married. But other than that, this subject is rather shrouded in mystery. Some say Paul Bunyan didn't even have a wife at all, and others that he hid her, sort of, that he was very protective of his wife and kept her guarded. And others say that he was just an asexual, and even some stories have said he was a homosexual, but nothing has ever been substantiated. I don't know. It's really a mystery in history. But, that is all the stories that I have for you all tonight. I suppose that I could leave off on a little sad note. I did find a record which seems to be fact-based, which says that Paul Bunyan buried his ox, Babe the Blue Ox, in this graveyard, and that he cried so much that he created an entire river from his tears. And, so now we know that Babe the Blue Ox is at least dead, although we never got word about Paul Bunyan. So, hopefully this legend of the West, this legend of the frontier is still alive out there somewhere. At least, we all can hope. And although I suppose Paul Bunyan has been a lot of trouble, for all the people of North Country, as well as kind of the world, I myself am very glad that such a man existed. And as always, sweet dreams and good night.